first I want to start off, can you share a little bit about yourself, what your assignments are at the Portland Police Bureau?
Yeah, I've been a Portland police officer for just over 18 years. I got hired in 2001. I've been a sergeant for about a year and a half. My entire career I've been, I've worked the street, I've been on patrol. Currently I'm assigned to afternoon shift at Central Precinct, and prior to being promoted to sergeant, I spent 13 years on the rapid response team, several years as one of the less lethal operators, and several years of that as an instructor, and for a short time as the lead instructor for that program.
Awesome. So most recently you've been assigned to Central Precinct.
Yes.
And there's been a number of nights that you've worked where there have been protests. Are there any that stand out?
Yeah, there's a couple actually that stand out. The first being, if I remember the dates correctly, June 29th into the 30th. It was a first night, if I remember correctly, that RRT was not available. They'd been working for almost a month at that point. I think actually a month at that point. And so the crowd sizes had kind of started to dwindle, and we the fences around the perimeter of the Justice Center had been taken down. And essentially, our plan was to, not engage the crowd. There were still small crowds that were showing up, but the idea behind that was just to kind of de-escalate the tensions and not be out and visible. We still had an officer stationed inside, right inside the front doors. The front of the precinct is boarded up, but that was just for security purposes, to lock the doors if crowds should show up. And on that particular night they did. There were probably, I would guess, anywhere from 150 to 200 people that showed up on the 2nd Avenue side of the Justice Center. And it was he and I and then one other sergeant that were the only sworn members in the building. And that night, the crowd started kind of, they could see through small gaps in the plywood, and they were really taunting the officer inside, saying some pretty horrific things to him, talking about how they were going to burn the building down, how they were going to kill him, just some things that really nobody should be exposed to. So myself and the other sergeant, we just moved him back so he would be out of sight, in hope, again, to de-escalate the tensions and to not have this thing, blow up. But the crowd was interested in other things. They were not interested in de-escalating. They, in fact, we were watching some of the live streams. We were watching on the cameras that at the time were operational. And they were completely escalating. They were tearing pieces of plywood off to expose the windows, and as they would do that, myself and the other sergeant would move, again, to stay out of sight, but we were still there for security. And it got to the point where they were, throwing burning material into the lobby through gaps in the windows and blowing marijuana smoke, and it was almost like a scene out of a horror movie. It was really unnerving, and our thoughts were, again, to keep, trying to de-escalate by not having officers come into the area, by not, moving squads in to clear off the front of the building. We were just really hoping that they would do what they were going to do and then leave. But it wasn't until they had removed all of the plywood, they had disabled all of the exterior cameras, that they started coming at the windows with hammers. They had removed some 2x4 lumber, and they were smashing at the windows of the precinct in what I believed was a really sincere effort to get inside. And it was so unnerving to the people inside, in fact, that the civilian staff, we had to move them up to the upper floors of the Justice Center to shelter in place. And we ended up taking a defensive position, fearing the worst, that they were coming inside, and by words and actions that we had already seen, their intent was to harm us and to essentially burn down the building. So while I was on the phone making command notifications, the other sergeant that was on scene moved a squad in to clear off the front of the building. And that particular night, I think we spent probably the better part of the next 2 hours with a very small contingent of Portland police officers and Multnomah County officers defending the building. We would make pushes because that was the only thing that we really had available. We would make pushes away from the building, and they would come back and continue to remove the board up from the north side of the building and continue to, make their attempts to start fires and to gain entry, and it just it ultimately ended up ending through their attrition. They kind of started to fade off into the distance, but for a long time they were really persistent and just absolutely refusing to leave despite any attempts of on our part to de-escalate.
So when you talk about the officers who were out there doing the pushes, you're talking about patrol officers who've had some basic training in mobile field force and things we get at Advanced Academy, but you didn't have the specialized team from RRT.
Right.
And what about, arrests or giving direction or commands? Was any of that considered, or how did that work?
Yeah, that was difficult because again, through RRT, there's generally an incident command. There's the emergency operations center is in place, and there are higher level ranking officers that are kind of helping control the entire event. In this case, it fell really on the shoulders of myself and another sergeant, and then finally an acting lieutenant who made his way to the scene. And coordinating all of that, along with coordinating the people on the ground and trying to strategize on how we were going to bring this to a successful conclusion, was extremely difficult, and frankly, it was overwhelming. We were able to get a couple of officers on a PA in a patrol car behind us to make announcements, and realistically, those announcements, we essentially just tried to have them emulate what they had heard at previous events. We would tell them, let them know that the streets are closed, and that if they don't, follow our commands or get out of the streets, all of the warnings that we give. And as we know throughout these events, those announcements are not well received with a certain contingent of the crowd. And on this particular night, every single person in that crowd was, all of the people with a message had gone, and this was 200 rioters essentially is what it was. So that was very difficult to get that message across and to try to make sure that we were doing it, through all the admonishments and everything that we're, required to give, and it was an extremely overwhelming experience.
And in the meantime, you have a precinct where calls for service are still coming in.
Yeah.
And what is that like, trying to balance, what's happening outside the precinct?
Well, first of all, given Central Precinct, or any precinct in the city for that matter, is really kind of a hub of operations where there are essential things inside those buildings that we need to successfully do our jobs. So patrol officers need to have the ability to come and go, and really throughout the last couple months, that's been extremely difficult in timing. How do we get into the precinct? It's one of those things where there might be something that is maybe time sensitive, where evidence needs to be submitted, but they can't get in, so they have to run across town and check with another precinct to see if that is available. So things like that make it very difficult when there's a crowd around, but the amount of resources available to actually deal with the calls is extremely limited. And I have seen calls throughout the last couple months that have held for a day. Because there's just nobody to go. And particularly on a night where, we already have limited resources to begin with, and then we pull several officers off of the street away from patrol to deal with a crowd that essentially wants to burn down the building with, the jail and civilian staff and all kinds of civilian people in it. It just completely decimates our resources.
So I know from talking to you earlier, there was another night that really stands out.
Yeah.
I know we've had many nights, some of them seem like they blur together, but you were sharing a little bit about another significant night. Can you talk about that?
Yeah, and I can't remember the date, but we had a relatively large group. If I remember, again, it was, I think by the time I got there were 400 or 500 people, but a large group had marched up to the Portland Police Association office up on Lombard, and I was called in as part of a mobile field force. I got together a mobile field force squad from Central Precinct and took them up there. And basically our job was just to kind of augment, supplement the and reinforce the other mobile field forces that were there, along with our squad of rapid response team. And during that time, the PPA office was being boarded up, which took quite some time. And while we were standing on line for hours, you know, our officers were subject to some of the most horrific displays of hate that I've ever seen in my life. In particular, I had 2 female officers on my squad, and the crowd seemed to really key in on them, along with the women that were on RRT. And they were just saying some of the most vile things to them. You know, talking about sexually assaulting them, talking about how they were, you know, sex objects for all the other officers, you know, on the squad. And even going as far as to say that there was one individual who said that he was going to take the baton from one of the female officers and sexually abuse her with it. It was, I mean, again, something that is so vile. Nobody should be exposed to that. And in addition to all this, we, along with the board-up crew, were taking, you know, large rocks, bottles filled with who knows what, all kinds of objects being thrown from the crowd, and this went on for hours. I kept checking in with the officers on the line and making sure that they were okay to, you know, to be out there, because it does take kind of a psychological toll, you know, to sit there and listen to this hate, you know, for no other reason other than the fact that we're, you know, police officers. So that was one of those nights. I would say that's, you know, down in the one of the lowest worst nights of my career.
You have anything else to add?
You know, I just really think, you know, with everything that's going on, I really think that, you know, most people are really supportive, I believe. I still truly believe that most people are really supportive of us. When we're down here during the day, when I walk out of Central Precinct or out in the community, there are people all the time that stop and say, we don't agree with what's going on. We support you. We love you. There are signs downstairs in the lobby of, you know, where people have brought those things to us. And realistically, I understand and I know that this is just a small group that's causing all of these issues, really. But I don't believe that they have any intention of stopping. And what they're really trying to do is completely dismantle, you know, Portland as we know it. And I think more of those people that are showing support need to step up and speak out against it. And I really think that's how we're going to get through this.
Thank you, Sergeant Maxey, for taking the time.